The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned streets of downtown Phoenix as Marcus Rodriguez crouched behind the rusted remains of a delivery truck, his calloused fingers gripping the worn handle of his machete. The silence was deceptive. He could hear them shuffling somewhere in the distance, their distinctive dragging footsteps echoing off empty storefronts like a grotesque metronome counting down to humanity's final moments. It had been 3 months since the outbreak began, 3 months since everything changed, and Marcus had learned that in this new world, silence meant opportunity while noise meant death. His weathered face, marked by sleepless nights and constant vigilance, scanned the intersection ahead where the skeletal remains of traffic lights swayed in the desert breeze, their colored lenses long since shattered by the chaos that had consumed civilization. Behind him, tucked safely inside the reinforced community center that had become their fortress, 23 survivors depended on his morning reconnaissance missions to determine whether it was safe to venture out for supplies. Marcus had never asked to become their leader, but leadership had chosen him the day he'd saved 12 people from a horde of infected that had overrun the local hospital. His background as a former Army engineer had given him the tactical knowledge they desperately needed, while his experience as a construction foreman had taught him how to fortify their defenses using whatever materials they could scavenge from the urban wasteland around them. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden, but he carried it willingly because he understood something that many others had failed to grasp. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about preserving what remained of human civilization and passing it on to future generations who might one day reclaim their world. The infected, never zombies, as Hollywood had so dramatically portrayed them, moved with a terrifying purpose that Marcus had begun to understand through careful observation and painful experience. Unlike the mindless shambling corpses of popular fiction, these creatures retained fragments of their former intelligence, using crude tools, setting simple traps, and even demonstrating basic pack hunting behaviors that made them infinitely more dangerous than anyone had initially realized. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, the former CDC researcher who had become their group's scientific advisor, theorized that the pathogen hadn't completely destroyed higher brain functions but rather rewired them toward a singular goal: the propagation of the infection through coordinated attacks on uninfected humans. This revelation had fundamentally changed their approach to combat, forcing them to develop new tactical strategies that accounted for an enemy capable of learning from their mistakes and adapting to human defensive measures. Marcus adjusted his position as movement caught his peripheral vision, 3 infected individuals emerging from the shadows of a collapsed department store, their once human faces displaying the characteristic pale complexion and dilated pupils that marked the advanced stages of infection. Their clothes hung in tatters, revealing the distinctive network of darkened veins that spread across their skin like twisted road maps of the pathogen's progression through their circulatory systems. What struck Marcus most wasn't their appearance. He'd grown accustomed to that particular horror, but rather the way they moved together, spacing themselves strategically to cover multiple approaches to his position. Intelligence. Coordination. Planning. These weren't the mindless creatures that early government broadcasts had promised would be easy to contain, these were something far more sinister and infinitely more challenging to combat effectively. The lead infected, a woman who might have been a teacher or office worker in her previous life, raised her head slightly and seemed to sniff the air, testing for the scent of uninfected humans with the practiced efficiency of a predator who had learned to hunt using every available sense. Marcus held his breath, knowing that even the slightest sound could trigger a coordinated attack that would bring dozens more running from their hidden lairs throughout the abandoned commercial district. His radio, set to the lowest possible volume, crackled softly with the voice of Tommy Washington, their communications specialist, reporting from the rooftop observation post that additional infected had been spotted moving through the residential areas to the north. The noose was tightening around their sanctuary, and Marcus realized that their carefully planned morning supply run would have to become something much more dangerous, a strategic combat mission designed to thin the growing horde before it could organize into an overwhelming assault on their defensive perimeter. Years of military training had taught Marcus that successful combat required 3 essential elements: superior intelligence about enemy movements and capabilities, tactical advantages that could be exploited through careful positioning and timing, and most importantly, the psychological preparation to make difficult decisions under extreme pressure when human lives hung in the balance. As he watched the infected systematically search the area around his concealed position, Marcus began formulating a plan that would utilize every lesson he'd learned about these creatures' behavioral patterns and weaknesses. The morning reconnaissance mission was about to become the first phase of a larger strategic operation that would determine whether their group could continue to survive in this section of the city or whether they would be forced to abandon everything they'd built and flee deeper into the unforgiving desert, where different but equally deadly challenges awaited any humans brave or foolish enough to venture into the unknown territories beyond civilization's crumbling borders. The radio in Marcus's ear buzzed with urgent whispers as Jessica Martinez, their perimeter guard, reported movement from multiple directions converging on the community center. Her voice carried the controlled tension of someone who had learned to communicate vital information without betraying the fear that threatened to overwhelm rational thought in moments of extreme danger. Marcus pressed the transmit button twice, their agreed signal for message received, maintain radio silence, and began his tactical withdrawal from the intersection, using the systematic movement patterns that Tommy had helped him perfect during countless training sessions in the relative safety of their fortified compound. Every step was calculated to minimize noise while maintaining visual contact with potential threats, a delicate balance that required absolute concentration and nerves of steel forged through months of life-or-death encounters with an enemy that showed no mercy and granted no second chances to those who made mistakes. The infected woman suddenly stopped her methodical search and turned directly toward Marcus's position, her head tilting at an unnatural angle that suggested enhanced hearing capabilities far beyond normal human parameters. Dr. Hayes had documented similar sensory improvements in captured specimens, theorizing that the pathogen enhanced certain neurological functions while suppressing others, creating a predator specifically designed to hunt uninfected humans. With terrifying efficiency. Marcus froze completely, controlling even his breathing as the creature's pale eyes swept across the area where he crouched behind the deteriorating vehicle. Time stretched into an eternity of suspended animation where the difference between life and death could be measured in heartbeats, and Marcus found himself counting each pulse of blood through his veins while calculating the precise moment when he would need to abandon stealth for the desperate combat that might be his only chance of returning to warn the others about the coordinated assault that was clearly being organized against their sanctuary. The sound of breaking glass echoed from somewhere behind the infected trio, causing them to pivot simultaneously toward the disturbance with the fluid coordination of a military unit responding to battlefield commands. Marcus recognized the diversion immediately. Jamie Thompson, their youngest member at 19, had volunteered for the dangerous job of creating strategic distractions during reconnaissance missions, using his natural agility and intimate knowledge of the urban landscape to draw infected away from critical areas. The kid had nerves of steel and reflexes that had saved the entire group on more than one occasion, but Marcus worried constantly about the psychological toll that such high-risk assignments took on someone who should have been worrying about college applications instead of perfecting techniques for evading creatures that wanted nothing more than to tear him apart and spread their infection to every remaining human on Earth. As the infected moved toward Jamie's position, Marcus seized the opportunity to advance his own mission parameters, slipping from shadow to shadow with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to navigate this nightmare landscape through necessity and determination rather than choice. His destination was the abandoned pharmacy 3 blocks north of their position, where intelligence reports suggested a significant cache of medical supplies had been overlooked during the initial chaos of the outbreak. Dr. Hayes had specifically requested certain antibiotics and surgical materials that could mean the difference between life and death for Maria Gonzalez, who was fighting a serious infection from a wound sustained during their last supply mission. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that in a world overrun by infection, traditional bacterial infections could still kill just as efficiently as the pathogen that had transformed most of humanity into hunting machines designed to perpetuate their own twisted version of existence. The streets around the pharmacy appeared eerily quiet, but Marcus had learned not to trust appearances in this new world where death could be hiding behind any corner, inside any building, or beneath any pile of debris that might conceal an infected ambush waiting for unwary humans to venture too close to their carefully prepared killing zones. His approach route took him through a series of connected alleyways that provided multiple escape options while minimizing exposure to the main thoroughfares where infected tended to congregate during daylight hours. Intelligence gathered over months of careful observation had revealed patterns in their behavior, they seemed to prefer the shadows during peak sunlight but became increasingly active and aggressive as darkness approached, suggesting that their enhanced sensory capabilities might include some form of photosensitivity that affected their hunting strategies and territorial behaviors in ways that human survivors could exploit through proper tactical planning and execution. Marcus paused at the corner of the final alley, his trained eyes scanning the pharmacy's exterior for signs of infected presence or structural weaknesses that might compromise his extraction route once he obtained the critical medical supplies. The building's front windows had been boarded up with plywood that showed claw marks and impact damage, evidence of previous infected attempts to breach the interior where they might have detected human scent or heard sounds that triggered their predatory instincts. However, Marcus noticed that the emergency exit on the building's east side remained intact, its heavy steel door still mounted properly in its frame and potentially accessible through the maintenance corridor that connected to the adjacent office building. This route would require him to navigate through unknown territory, but it offered the tactical advantage of avoiding the main entrance where infected might be waiting in ambush positions established during previous human attempts to raid the pharmacy's valuable resources. The sound of distant gunfire echoed across the urban landscape, causing Marcus to immediately activate his radio with a subtle hand signal that would alert his team to potential changes in the tactical situation developing around their operational area. The shots came from the direction of their community center, measured and controlled rather than the panicked spray of automatic weapons that usually indicated a desperate last stand against overwhelming infected forces. This meant that Robert Blake, their defensive coordinator and former police sergeant, had initiated Protocol 7, the strategic elimination of infected scouts before they could report back to larger groups about the location and defensive capabilities of human survivors. Marcus smiled grimly, knowing that Robert's methodical approach to perimeter defense had bought them valuable time to complete their current mission, but also understanding that the sound of gunfire would attract every infected within a 5-mile radius to investigate the source of the disturbance. Moving with practiced silence through the maintenance corridor, Marcus encountered evidence of the pharmacy's previous occupants scattered throughout the narrow passageway, personal belongings, medical equipment, and the distinctive scratch marks that infected left on surfaces when they used their enhanced fingernails to mark territory or communicate with other members of their pack. Dr. Hayes had documented these territorial markings extensively, discovering that infected used a complex system of chemical scents and physical symbols to coordinate hunting patterns and establish hierarchical structures within their growing communities. The implications were terrifying. These creatures weren't just surviving the apocalypse, they were evolving into something that resembled a primitive civilization with its own rules, territories, and social organization designed around the systematic conversion of remaining human populations. The pharmacy's interior had been ransacked multiple times, with empty shelves and scattered debris indicating that several groups of survivors had attempted to secure medical supplies before Marcus's current mission. However, his intelligence network had identified a hidden storage area behind the prescription counter where the pharmacy's emergency reserves had been concealed from casual observers and desperate raiders who lacked the systematic approach necessary to conduct thorough searches under dangerous conditions. Marcus approached the concealed panel with methodical precision, using techniques learned during military operations in urban environments where enemy forces might booby-trap valuable resources to eliminate unwary soldiers who failed to follow proper clearance protocols. The storage area contained exactly what Dr. Hayes had requested: broad-spectrum antibiotics, surgical sutures, sterilization supplies, and pain medication that could transform their medical capabilities from basic first aid to legitimate trauma care for serious injury sustained during combat operations against infected forces. Marcus carefully inventoried each item while listening for sounds that might indicate infected presence in the surrounding area, knowing that his extraction window was rapidly closing as more infected responded to the gunfire signals echoing across the city. His radio crackled with Tommy's voice reporting that perimeter sensors had detected significant movement from multiple directions, suggesting that a coordinated assault on their sanctuary was imminent and all field operatives needed to return to defensive positions immediately. As Marcus secured the medical supplies in his tactical pack, a scratching sound from the building's upper level caused him to freeze in place and reassess his tactical situation with the heightened awareness that had kept him alive through countless similar encounters. The sound repeated with mechanical regularity, suggesting tool use rather than random movement, infected had learned to use simple implements to manipulate their environment in ways that provided strategic advantages during hunting operations. Marcus realized that his extraction through the maintenance corridor might be compromised, forcing him to consider alternative routes that would expose him to greater risks but might provide the element of surprise necessary to avoid direct confrontation with what could be multiple infected working together to trap human intruders who had ventured into their established territory seeking resources essential for the survival of uninfected communities. The scratching intensified, accompanied by the distinctive sound of wood splintering as something above began systematically dismantling the floorboards between the upper and lower levels of the pharmacy building. Marcus's military training immediately identified this as a flanking maneuver designed to create multiple points of attack that would overwhelm a single defender's ability to maintain situational awareness across all potential threat vectors. His hand moved instinctively to the combat knife strapped to his thigh while his other hand activated the emergency beacon that would signal his team to initiate immediate extraction protocols, even if it meant compromising their own defensive positions to mount a rescue operation in hostile territory. The beacon's silent pulse would reach Tommy's communication array within seconds, triggering a cascade of predetermined responses that had been rehearsed countless times during their tactical training sessions in the relative safety of their fortified compound. Through the pharmacy's front windows, Marcus spotted movement that confirmed his worst tactical nightmare, a coordinated pincer attack with infected approaching from multiple directions while others worked to breach his position from above, demonstrating a level of strategic thinking that exceeded even Dr. Hayes's most pessimistic assessments of their evolutionary capabilities. The infected outside moved with purpose, spacing themselves to cover all potential escape routes while maintaining visual communication through subtle hand gestures that suggested a sophisticated command structure operating within their hunting pack. Marcus counted at least 8 individuals in the immediate area, but his experience told him that visible infected represented only a fraction of the total force deployed for such an elaborate tactical operation against a single human target. The radio in Marcus's ear exploded with controlled chaos as his team responded to the emergency beacon, their voices overlapping in rapid-fire tactical communications that painted a grim picture of the situation developing across their entire operational area. Robert's defensive positions were under increasing pressure from probing attacks designed to test their perimeter strength, while Jessica reported that infected scouts were using mirrors and reflective surfaces to signal coordinates to approaching reinforcements gathering in the abandoned shopping district 3 miles east of their sanctuary. Most disturbing of all, Dr. Hayes detected organized smoke signals rising from multiple locations across the city, a development that suggested different infected communities were communicating across vast distances to coordinate a massive assault that would dwarf anything human survivors had previously encountered. Marcus made the tactical decision that would define the next phase of their survival strategy, rather than attempt a defensive extraction that might compromise his team's ability to protect their sanctuary. He would implement the experimental offensive protocol that he and Robert had developed during late-night planning sessions when sleep proved impossible and the weight of leadership demanded constant preparation for scenarios too terrible to discuss during daylight hours. The protocol required him to engage infected forces directly while using their own tactical advantages against them, turning their coordinated hunting behavior into a vulnerability that could be exploited by a single human operator with sufficient knowledge of their behavioral patterns and strategic thinking capabilities. Using the pharmacy's internal layout to his advantage, Marcus began implementing a series of diversionary tactics designed to fracture the infected's coordinated assault into multiple smaller engagements that he could handle individually rather than facing the overwhelming force of their combined attack. He activated every battery-powered device in the building simultaneously, emergency lights, backup alarms, and electronic equipment that had remained functional since the outbreak, creating a cacophony of sound and visual stimulation that would confuse the infected's enhanced sensory capabilities and force them to adapt their attack strategy in real time. The psychological warfare aspects of this approach had been Dr. Hayes's contribution to the protocol, based on her research showing that infected retained enough neurological function to experience confusion and frustration when their carefully planned operations were disrupted by unexpected environmental changes. The infected above responded exactly as predicted, abandoning their systematic floor breach to investigate the sudden chaos erupting throughout the building, giving Marcus the tactical window he needed to position himself for the offensive phase of his extraction plan. His movements were calculated to exploit their pack mentality. Infected who encountered resistance in one area would signal for reinforcements, creating predictable patterns of movement that could be used to channel them into predetermined kill zones where superior positioning and environmental advantages could overcome numerical superiority. Marcus smiled grimly as he heard them moving through the building with increased urgency, knowing that their enhanced intelligence made them dangerous but also predictable once you understood their tactical doctrine and learned to think several moves ahead of their coordinated decision-making processes. The first infected to breach the storage area moved with the confidence of a predator who believed it had cornered helpless prey, but Marcus had positioned himself in the perfect ambush location behind a structural support beam that provided both concealment and protection from multiple attack vectors. The creature's pale eyes scanned the room methodically, but its enhanced senses had been overwhelmed by the electronic chaos still reverberating throughout the building, creating sensory confusion that masked Marcus's presence long enough for him to strike with the precision and lethality that months of survival combat had honed to a razor's edge of efficiency. Marcus's combat knife found its target with surgical precision, severing the infected spinal cord at the base of the skull in a technique that Dr. Hayes had identified as the most effective method for instant neutralization while minimizing noise that might alert other pack members to the elimination of their scout. The creature dropped silently, its enhanced nervous system shutting down before it could transmit any warning signals to the coordinated hunting force still moving through the building's upper levels. Marcus immediately repositioned to the opposite corner of the storage area, knowing that infected hunting protocols would send a second scout to investigate when the first failed to report back within their predetermined time parameters, creating opportunities for additional tactical eliminations that would steadily reduce the numerical advantages of the coordinated assault force. The electronic cacophony that Marcus had initiated began to have its intended psychological effect on the remaining infected, whose enhanced hearing capabilities were being overwhelmed by the conflicting audio signals bouncing off surfaces throughout the pharmacy's interior spaces. Through gaps in the ceiling tiles, Marcus could observe their increasingly erratic movement patterns as they struggled to process the sensory overload while maintaining their coordinated attack formation. Their pack discipline was beginning to fracture under the stress of environmental conditions that their enhanced capabilities couldn't adequately process, creating individual decision-making that deviated from their established tactical doctrine and provided Marcus with exploitable opportunities to further disrupt their operational effectiveness. The second infected to enter the storage area displayed significantly more caution than its predecessor, moving in short rushes between cover positions while using metallic debris as improvised shields, another indication of tool use that represented a troubling evolution in their tactical capabilities. Marcus recognized this behavior from Robert's field reports describing infected who had learned to adapt their hunting strategies based on previous encounters with human defensive measures. This creature had likely survived multiple engagements with human survivors and developed counter-tactics designed to minimize exposure to ambush attacks, making it a far more dangerous opponent that would require different approaches to achieve successful neutralization without compromising his position or alerting other pack members. Marcus adjusted his strategy to account for the infected's enhanced tactical awareness, using the pharmacy's maze of overturned shelving and scattered debris to create a complex movement pattern that would force his opponent to divide its attention between multiple potential threat vectors while advancing toward the storage area where the first scout had been eliminated. The psychological component of this approach relied on exploiting the infected's retained human intelligence. They still experienced fear and uncertainty when confronted with unknown threats, even though their predatory instincts had been enhanced by the pathogen. By creating an environment where the creature couldn't predict his location or movement patterns, Marcus transformed the engagement from a hunt into a puzzle that would consume mental resources and create opportunities for decisive action. The infected's enhanced senses detected the scent trail left by its eliminated pack mate, causing it to emit a low vocalization that Marcus recognized as a distress signal designed to summon reinforcements from throughout the building's interior spaces. This development accelerated Marcus's operational timeline significantly. Within minutes, every infected in the immediate area would converge on his position with coordinated tactics and numerical superiority that would overwhelm even his most optimistic combat scenarios. His radio crackled with urgent updates from Tommy, reporting that seismic sensors around their community center had detected large groups of infected moving through underground tunnel systems that connected to the city's extensive storm drain network, suggesting that the coordinated assault extended far beyond surface-level tactical operations. Marcus made the critical decision to abandon stealth protocols entirely and transition to high-mobility combat tactics that would allow him to fight his way through the infected forces while moving toward his primary extraction point at the building's emergency exit. This approach required him to engage multiple opponents simultaneously while maintaining forward momentum, using the building's interior obstacles as tactical advantages that could channel infected movement into predetermined engagement zones where his superior combat training and equipment could overcome their numerical advantages. The transition from defensive ambush tactics to offensive breakthrough operations represented one of the most dangerous phases of combat operations, requiring split-second decision-making and absolute commitment to aggressive action that left no room for hesitation or tactical reconsideration. The storage area erupted into controlled violence as Marcus implemented his breakthrough strategy, moving through the space with fluid efficiency that transformed every obstacle into either a weapon or protective cover while engaging infected targets with calculated precision designed to maximize casualties while conserving ammunition and energy for the extended running battle that would carry him through the building's remaining interior spaces. His combat knife became an extension of his tactical awareness, striking with mechanical precision while his free hand manipulated environmental elements to create additional advantages, overturning shelving units to block pursuit routes, activating fire suppression systems to create visual concealment, and using the building's emergency lighting to create shadows that concealed his movement patterns from infected observers attempting to coordinate pack responses to his aggressive assault on their coordinated hunting operation. Marcus burst through the pharmacy's emergency exit into the blazing Arizona sunlight, immediately assessing the tactical situation that had developed during his interior engagement with infected forces inside the building. The alleyway that had provided concealed approach routes during his infiltration mission now swarmed with infected who had responded to the distress signals emanating from their eliminated pack mates, their coordinated positioning indicating that they had successfully predicted his most likely extraction route and prepared an ambush designed to capture rather than immediately eliminate the human operative who had disrupted their carefully planned hunting operation. The sight that greeted Marcus confirmed Dr. Hayes's most disturbing theories about infected evolution. These creatures had developed tactical doctrine that prioritized capturing uninfected humans alive for purposes that extended far beyond simple infection transmission. The infected formation blocking his extraction route displayed military-style positioning that would have impressed Robert during his police training days, with overlapping fields of observation and carefully maintained spacing that prevented any single combatant from engaging multiple targets simultaneously. More alarming still, several infected carried improvised weapons fashioned from urban debris, sharpened metal rods, concrete blocks modified with rope handles, and what appeared to be crude spears created by attaching kitchen knives to wooden poles salvaged from construction sites. This tool's sophistication represented a quantum leap in their technological development that suggested organized manufacturing capabilities within infected communities, implying social structures and resource allocation systems that mirrored human civilization in disturbing ways. Marcus's radio crackled with Tommy's voice reporting a breakthrough in their tactical intelligence that would fundamentally alter their approach to combating the infected threat developing across their operational area. Surveillance drones deployed by their technical specialist had captured footage of infected communities engaged in what could only be described as agricultural activities, systematic cultivation of food sources, construction of permanent shelters, and most disturbing of all, organized care facilities where newly infected individuals were being conditioned and trained in coordinated hunting techniques before being deployed against human survivor communities. The implications were staggering. These creatures weren't just surviving the apocalypse, they were building sustainable societies designed to eventually replace human civilization with their own twisted version of organized existence. The tactical situation demanded immediate action before additional infected reinforcements could arrive to completely seal his extraction routes, forcing Marcus to implement the most dangerous component of his emergency protocols: direct engagement with multiple coordinated opponents while advancing through their established positions toward his predetermined rally point where extraction support from his team would be available. This maneuver required him to exploit the one significant advantage that human survivors maintained over infected forces: adaptability under pressure combined with sophisticated equipment that enhanced individual combat effectiveness beyond what even enhanced infected capabilities could match through coordination alone. Marcus activated the smoke grenades that he carried for exactly this type of emergency extraction scenario, creating a dense concealment cloud that would interfere with infected sensory capabilities while providing visual cover for his aggressive advance through their positions. The grenades had been modified by their technical team to include chemical compounds that Dr. Hayes had identified as particularly disruptive to infected neurological functions, creating temporary disorientation that would degrade their coordination and reaction times long enough for a determined human operator to fight through their defensive positions. As the concealment cloud expanded throughout the alleyway, Marcus heard the distinctive sounds of infected confusion, vocalizations that indicated communication breakdown and movement patterns that suggested their pack coordination was beginning to fracture under environmental stress. The running battle that followed tested every combat skill that Marcus had developed through months of survival operations against increasingly sophisticated infected opponents who had learned to counter many traditional human tactical advantages through enhanced physical capabilities and coordinated pack behavior. Marcus moved through the smoke cloud like a ghost of human military effectiveness, striking at targets of opportunity while maintaining forward momentum toward his extraction point where Tommy's voice guided him through radio communications that painted an increasingly desperate picture of the larger tactical situation developing across their entire operational area. Each step forward was purchased with tactical decisions that balanced immediate survival against long-term strategic considerations for his team's continued existence in a world where infected communities were evolving into something that might eventually challenge human survivors for control of remaining habitable territories. The alleyway's far end appeared through the dissipating smoke cloud like a gateway to potential salvation. But Marcus could see infected reinforcements already moving to intercept his advance from multiple directions with the methodical precision of a military operation designed to prevent any human operative from escaping their coordinated assault with intelligence about infected tactical capabilities and strategic objectives. His extraction window was closing rapidly, measured in seconds rather than minutes. And the critical medical supplies secured during his pharmacy infiltration represented resources that could mean the difference between life and death for Maria and potentially other team members who would inevitably sustain injuries during the escalating conflict that was transforming their survival situation into something resembling a war between two competing species fighting for dominance over the ruins of human civilization. The distinctive roar of motorcycle engines echoed across the urban landscape as Jamie Thompson executed the most dangerous rescue maneuver in their tactical playbook, weaving his modified dirt bike through infected positions while laying down suppressive fire from the compact submachine gun mounted to his vehicle's reinforced frame. The 19-year-old had transformed himself from college-bound teenager into one of their most effective mobile assault specialists, using his natural reflexes and mechanical aptitude to create a fighting platform that combined speed, firepower, and maneuverability in ways that consistently surprised infected forces who had learned to counter most human tactical advantages. His arrival at Marcus's position represented a calculated risk that could either save their mission or result in the loss of two critical team members, but the alternative, abandoning Marcus to capture or elimination, was unacceptable to a group that had built their survival strategy around the principle that no one gets left behind. Marcus sprinted toward Jamie's position as the young operative laid down covering fire that forced infected reinforcements to seek shelter behind urban debris, temporarily disrupting their coordinated advance while creating a narrow corridor through which extraction might be possible. The infected responded to this new threat with tactical adaptations that demonstrated their ability to rapidly adjust battlefield strategies in real time. Several individuals began coordinating flanking movements designed to attack Jamie's vehicle from multiple angles while others maintained pressure on Marcus's position to prevent him from reaching the extraction point. This level of battlefield awareness exceeded anything that human survivors had previously encountered, suggesting that infected communities had developed formal military training programs that prepared their hunting forces for complex multi-phase operations against organized human resistance. The motorcycle's engine screamed as Jamie executed a precision turn that brought his vehicle's armored side panels between Marcus and the closest infected attackers, providing mobile cover while Marcus closed the final distance to the extraction point with infected reinforcements converging from every available approach route. Marcus leaped onto the bike's reinforced passenger platform just as Jamie engaged the nitrous oxide system that their technical team had installed for emergency acceleration scenarios, launching them forward with enough velocity to break through the infected encirclement before their opponents could adjust their positions to block the escape route. The acceleration pressed Marcus against the vehicle's safety restraints with crushing force, but he managed to maintain his grip on the medical supplies that represented the successful completion of their primary mission objective despite the tactical complications that had transformed a simple reconnaissance operation into a running battle against increasingly sophisticated enemy forces. Behind them, the infected displayed a level of tactical persistence that chilled Marcus to his core as they immediately began coordinating pursuit operations that utilized vehicle resources abandoned throughout the urban landscape since the initial outbreak. Several infected had apparently learned to operate motorcycles and all-terrain vehicles, pursuing Jamie's bike with mechanical competence that suggested formal training in vehicle operation and maintenance within their evolving communities. The sight of infected riders coordinating their pursuit formation while communicating through hand signals represented a paradigm shift that would require fundamental changes to human survival tactics, since mobility advantages had been one of the few reliable tactical superiority factors that human survivors could depend on during extended operations in hostile territory. Jamie's voice crackled through the communication system as he reported multiple vehicle contacts pursuing their extraction route while simultaneously requesting immediate tactical support from their base defenses to establish a secure corridor for their return to the community center. The response from Robert was immediate but disturbing. Their perimeter defenses were already engaged with coordinated infected assaults from multiple directions, suggesting that Marcus's mission had been part of a larger tactical operation designed to scatter human defensive resources while infected forces positioned themselves for a decisive assault on their sanctuary. The community center's defensive systems were being tested by probing attacks that seemed designed to identify weaknesses rather than achieve immediate penetration, indicating that infected tactical doctrine now included reconnaissance and intelligence gathering phases that preceded major assault operations. The motorcycles screamed through empty streets as Jamie utilized every technique that months of survival operations had taught him about high-speed navigation through urban terrain littered with obstacles and potential ambush sites. His route selection demonstrated tactical thinking that would have impressed professional military advisors, using elevation changes and structural cover to break line-of-sight contact with pursuing infected while maintaining forward momentum toward their predetermined rally points where additional team members could provide supporting fire during the final approach to their fortified compound. Marcus found himself reassessing the capabilities of team members who had been forced to develop expertise in areas far beyond their original backgrounds, transforming from ordinary civilians into highly effective specialists whose combined skills might represent humanity's best hope for survival against an enemy that was evolving faster than anyone had anticipated. The community center appeared ahead through the heat shimmer rising from sun-baked asphalt, its reinforced walls and defensive positions representing safety and tactical advantage after the harrowing extraction operation that had revealed disturbing intelligence about infected capabilities and strategic objectives. However, the sight that greeted them challenged every assumption about their defensive security. Infected forces had established observation posts in buildings surrounding their sanctuary, using elevated positions and coordinated surveillance to monitor human movement patterns and defensive responses with the systematic approach of professional military intelligence operations. Marcus realized that their community center wasn't just under assault, it was under siege by an enemy that had learned to conduct sustained operations against fortified positions using tactics that mirrored human military doctrine while exploiting enhanced physical capabilities that gave them significant advantages in prolonged engagements against defending forces with limited resources and ammunition. Jamie executed a combat approach to their compound's main gate that utilized every evasive maneuver in their tactical playbook, weaving between abandoned vehicles and structural debris while infected snipers attempted to disable their motorcycle with improvised projectile weapons fired from elevated positions throughout the surrounding urban landscape. The coordinated nature of these attacks demonstrated that infected forces had developed specialized roles within their military structure, with dedicated marksmen providing overwatch support for ground operations while maintaining communication with tactical commanders who coordinated multi-phase assault strategies against human defensive positions. Marcus found himself impressed by the evolution of their enemies' capabilities while simultaneously terrified by the implications for human survival in a world where infected communities possessed military organization that rivaled professional armed forces. Robert's voice crackled through their radio communications as they approached the compound's outer perimeter, providing tactical updates that painted a comprehensive picture of the siege operation developing around their sanctuary. Infected forces had systematically positioned themselves to control every approach route while establishing supply lines that suggested they were prepared for extended operations rather than the quick raids that had characterized previous attacks on human settlements. Most disturbing of all, intercepted communications indicated that this assault represented only one component of a coordinated campaign against human survivor communities across the entire southwestern United States, with infected leadership coordinating simultaneous operations designed to eliminate organized human resistance before it could develop effective counter-strategies against their evolving civilization. The motorcycle's engine roared as Jamie accelerated through the final approach corridor while Marcus provided suppressive fire against infected positions that threatened their extraction route, his combat training automatically calculating range and trajectory corrections that maximized ammunition effectiveness while conserving their limited supply for the defensive battle that would inevitably follow their successful return to base. The medical supplies secured during his pharmacy mission had become secondary to the intelligence gathered about infected tactical capabilities, information that could revolutionize human defensive strategies if they survived long enough to implement. Comprehensive tactical reforms based on enemy capabilities that exceeded their most pessimistic projections about infected evolution. The compound's reinforced gates opened just long enough for Jamie's motorcycle to streak through the defensive perimeter before slamming shut with the mechanical precision of a system designed for rapid response to emergency extraction scenarios under hostile fire conditions. Marcus immediately dismounted and began coordinating with Dr. Hayes to distribute the critical medical supplies while simultaneously briefing Robert about infected tactical capabilities observed during his reconnaissance mission, information that would require immediate integration into their defensive planning if they hoped to survive the coordinated assault that was clearly building toward a decisive engagement. The 19 team members gathered in their command center represented the combined expertise and determination that had sustained them through months of increasingly dangerous survival operations, but Marcus understood that the conflict evolving around their sanctuary would test every capability they had developed while demanding tactical innovations that pushed beyond conventional military doctrine. Dr. Hayes accepted the medical supplies with visible relief, immediately beginning treatment procedures for Maria while listening to Marcus's intelligence reports about infected community organization and military capabilities that suggested a fundamental shift in the nature of the threat facing human survivors. Her scientific background enabled her to rapidly process the implications of infected agricultural development and training facilities, recognizing that these developments indicated reproductive success and population growth within infected communities that could eventually result in numerical superiority that would overwhelm any conceivable human defensive capability. The pathogen had apparently achieved evolutionary stability that enabled sustainable population growth while maintaining enhanced capabilities that gave infected significant advantages in direct confrontation with uninfected humans. Marcus gathered his team around the tactical planning table where detailed maps of their operational area were marked with confirmed infected positions, movement patterns, and tactical capabilities that painted a sobering picture of their strategic situation. The siege developing around their compound represented more than a simple assault, it was a demonstration of infected military capabilities designed to test human defensive responses while gathering intelligence about survivor tactics and resource allocation strategies. Robert's defensive preparations had been methodical and comprehensive, but the enemy they faced had evolved beyond their tactical projections, requiring adaptive strategies that balanced immediate survival with long-term resistance operations against an opponent that possessed both enhanced physical capabilities and sophisticated organizational structures. The radio crackled with transmissions from other survivor communities across the region, their desperate communications painting a coordinated picture of simultaneous assaults that confirmed Marcus's intelligence about infected strategic planning on a scale that dwarfed previous tactical assessments. However, embedded within these reports were accounts of successful defensive innovations and tactical adaptations that suggested human survivors were beginning to develop effective counter-strategies against infected military capabilities. Tommy's analysis of communication patterns indicated that survivor communities were sharing tactical intelligence and coordinating mutual support operations that could eventually challenge infected territorial expansion if properly organized and equipped. Marcus realized that their community center represented more than a survival sanctuary. It had become a strategic outpost in a larger conflict that would determine whether human civilization could adapt and survive against an enemy that threatened to replace them entirely, and their success or failure in the coming battle would send ripples across a network of human survivors who were watching, learning, and preparing to carry forward the tactical innovations that might ultimately preserve human civilization against impossible odds in a world transformed beyond recognition.